like how I had the decision whether or not I wanted to stay here or leave.
Mm-hmm. You don't want to be recorded. You don't have to stick around.
Okay, I think I have 5 after, just about. Get the show on the road. All right, hearing no objections, let's make moves here. Welcome everyone. You are here, as you can hopefully see on your screen, at the Bridge Street Corridor meeting. We have some draft alternatives to put forth and showcase. They've been up on the project website for a couple of weeks now. Tonight's presentation is available on the project website. Hopefully people in attendance have been able to take a look at that. But if not, we're gonna go through that tonight. And if you weren't at the first meeting, this is our second meeting tonight. So we're about halfway through this process. This is our last scheduled big public meeting as part of this project. You know, from here, we're going to be looking to solidify some recommended alternatives to bring those before the select board. Don't have a date quite on that, but stay tuned. We can work something out, but ideally before the end of June is when we're looking to eventually wrap this project up for good. Before I get too far into this project, procedural matter. If you do have any comments that you'd like to get out from the get-go before we really dive into things, I welcome those now. You're also welcome to talk about particular items when we get to them as part of the presentation. So if anybody would like to speak, please, Jen, should they raise their hand? Is that how we'd like them to do it?
Yeah, if you could raise your hand, if you know where your raise your hand button is. Usually it's a part of kind of your toolbar or in your participants pane, I believe. There's an option there. If you don't know how to raise your hand, you certainly can personally raise your hand. You can also send a message in the chat if you have any questions. As we move through the presentation, our plan is to hesitate after kind of each alternative to give time to ask questions focused on that alternative. So you should have plenty of time to weigh in. But in general, we're running this as a meeting. It's not a webinar, so everyone can unmute themselves. We just ask everyone, obviously, to be respectful about doing that and speaking over each other. Without further ado, Jason, should we take off?
I think so. The only one last thing I wanted to mention, high level, is why this study is being undertaken, and that is because it is a request that the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission received from the town of Richmond to take a look at Bridge Street. So that's something as part of our annual work program. So that's kind of why this is happening and being done through a mixture of state, federal, and local transportation dollars. And yeah, that's it. Jen, do you want me to just introduce myself while I'm at it?
Yeah, you might as well. We can get into the introductions.
Sure. I'm Jason Shrest with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. I'm the Senior Transportation Planning Engineer there, and I'm the project manager on behalf of the CCRPC for this project.
Karen, do you want to move to the introduction slide, and why don't we just keep rolling with introductions while we're in? And then we can jump back to the agenda.
I don't think we had a specific slide for introductions.
I'm sorry, I thought we did. Well, I'm Jennifer Conley. I'm the project manager for the project from VHB. And with me, Karen.
Karen Sentoff, also with VHB on the project team.
Sai, did you want to say hi from the CCRPC as well?
Yeah, Sai Sarpalli. I'm the Senior Transportation Planning Engineer at Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. I'm on the staff, supporting staff.
What about you folks from the town? Both from the Transportation Committee and staff, both are represented here tonight. Does anyone want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Alan Knowles. I'm on the Transportation Committee and I live on East Main Street and walk, bike, and occasionally drive on Bridge Street. And I have opinions.
Excellent.
Come to the right place.
I'm Kathleen Gent on the Transportation Committee as well.
And the same year, John Cart, also on the Transportation Committee.
I'm Gary Bresser. I'm not on the committee. I'm just a resident that lives on Bridge Street.
No.
I'm Ian Stokes. I'm serving on the committee for the bike pedestrian trails study, which is currently looking at north of the river. So there's a lot of overlap.
Great.
I'm Fran Huntoon. I'm not on the committee, but I'm married to Kathleen Gent, so I'm here.
Wonderful.
And
like your
I'm
shirt.
Ravi Venkatraman, and I'm the town planner, and I think almost all of you know me.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. So you see up on your screen our agenda for tonight. We did just our reintroductions. I think most of us have met in the past, which is great. We'll briefly discuss the study area and the purpose and need, which we went into a little bit deeper at the last meeting. Then Karen is going to present the alternatives, both for between Main Street and Railroad Street, and then also down at the intersection with Huntington Road. And as I said, although we list discussion and next steps at the end, we will be having a discussion kind of throughout the process. So we look forward to kind of a lively discussion. We will do a little bit of polling to just see how the crowd is feeling as we move around, just so that we have some ideas. So I don't think the study area is really a surprise to anyone. As we talked about, it's kind of the northern part of the study area is kind of the commercial area, and that's between Route 2 and Railroad Street and Jelena Court. And so we took a look at alternatives up there, but then also there was a concern down at Bridge Street at Cochrane Road, Huntington Road. Down at that location as well. So those are the geographical areas we concentrated on for this study. One of the things that we got into at the local concerns meeting was to really think about what the purpose and need for this project was. And I'm not going to read it, but really it has to do with creating a multimodal corridor here to better accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists. There were a few different needs that were identified regarding mobility and safety, but also with an eye towards maintaining parking to support businesses was an important piece of the needs of this project as we evaluate all our alternatives. Without, Karen can jump right into presenting some of the alternatives.
Sorry, I'm getting a little accustomed to this new setup here, so forgive me. All right, so we came up with a couple of different alternatives for this section of the corridor along Bridge Street. This first one, we're jumping right in. What you're seeing on the screen in sort of dark highlighted lines is new sidewalk. So that's a new 5-foot sidewalk on both the west and east side of Bridge Street, the west side through that section along the front of the Richmond Market, and on the east side, basically from Jelena Court all the way to where the current sidewalk ends on that east side, up at that mid-block crossing in front of the commercial block. So new 5-foot sidewalk, and really the differentiator in this alternative compared to the others is that we're really trying to accommodate that 5-foot sidewalk basically to where the edge of pavement exists today. So in terms of impacts beyond where that pavement is today, it's really minimal. But with that, sort of the trade-off that we're seeing is that, a shared lane condition for the bicyclists. So, even though we're limiting that impact beyond the edge of current pavement, and getting those sidewalks in, we're in a shared lane condition for those cyclists. And one other thing to highlight on this alternative, here we're showing a new crosswalk, sort of highlighted in yellow there, just between Depot Street and Pleasant Street on the south side of that intersection. So maintaining the mid-block crossing over on the commercial block, but then adding in a crossing at Depot Street and Pleasant Street.
Is this alternative clear to everyone? So again, adding not just the sidewalk where it's currently kind of the longest crosswalk ever painted, but also adding it on the east side of the street, really within what is currently the edge of roadway. So it's taking what are our generous lanes now and extending, providing the sidewalk along that side, which we did hear clearly at the local concerns meeting. Any clarifying questions on that?
All right, hearing none, we'll skip forward to the second alternative for this segment. All right, so in this alternative, alternative 2, again, we're adding in those 5-foot sidewalks on both sides. So new 5-foot sidewalk on the Richmond Market side of the street and 5-foot sidewalk on the eastern side of the street up to meet where the sidewalk ends on that side currently. But with this option, we're bumping that sidewalk out a bit further past where that edge of pavement is today to accommodate that 5-foot uphill bike lane. So here we do have some impacts beyond that sort of edge of pavement that's currently out there, but we're getting those uphill cyclists into their own facility. I'm sort of dedicating some space for those folks that we're anticipating are operating those bikes a little bit slower than the folks going downhill. So we've got that shared lane for the folks going downhill, but that dedicated space for folks going uphill. The other thing that we're seeing in this option highlighted in yellow is a new crossing with a pedestrian bump out at the corner of Depot Street. So here we were intending to add in this crossing and potentially remove that mid-block crossing. So sort of renegotiating a little bit of the parking, taking out that mid-block crossing, but giving us a nice, visible ped refuge on that Depot Street corner there.
Any clarifying questions on this? I would say again, the differentiator here is that there will be widening into what is the slope on that east side. And you can see in a condition where we don't provide a wall where that resulting top of slope would end up. So there will be some impacts to that 14 Pleasant Street property. But again, we can certainly evaluate whether to do that with a wall to make it less impactful or to do it with a gradual slope. Yes, go ahead, Alan.
So if you remove the mid-block crossing and put the crossing down by Pleasant Street, will the flashing lights for the pedestrians also move? And then the second part of that is, do you have any plans for slowing the traffic that is coming off of Route 2, making a right turn onto Bridge Street? And frequently, do they just come around that corner and hit the gas? And perceptually, it is a very crowded area. I mean, I drive it. It's hard to come around that corner and take in, is somebody going to back out of angled parking? Are the lights flashing? Are the people on the sidewalks actually pedestrians who are going to hit the crosswalk? 25 miles an hour is just too fast for all that. And they go much faster than 25 on many occasions. They hit the gas.
I think it would be difficult for us to do too much to slow the traffic down right as they come around that corner. And part of that reason is because of kind of some of the open curb, the properties that are located along there. I know our concepts don't extend that far, but we do, we still have that issue with the property on the corner having kind of wide open curb cuts there. So as you come around the corner, it does feel a little wider. But then, as you said, I feel like you get into a narrower situation. In this situation, it'll be a slightly more well-defined, even perhaps narrower location with the striping. The other thing with the pedestrian crossing here is that we're really bumping them out, so they will get at least a good line of sight towards that traffic as it's coming along.
Well,
So
I agree with all that, but
Mhm.
how about a mid-block speed bump where that mid-block sidewalk disappears to keep the traffic at a reasonable speed? Because the only thing now that slows them down is the railroad tracks.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the de facto speed bump in the whole area.
That's certainly something we could think about. Our concern would be a couple of things with the mid-block speed bump, and drainage is the first thing that comes to mind. But we do have some spot survey out there, so we certainly could look at that and see if that could be accomplished. And then the maneuvers of people pulling in and out of the parking with the speed bump behind them. But I would say really any alternative we move forward with, we certainly could evaluate that. Kathleen.
Thanks. I had actually a question that two questions that pertain to both alternatives. And in terms of the wall versus a slope, did I understand that you could have a wall for either alternative? And I just wanted to see if you could explain why you have a slope with this alternative as opposed to a wall. And then I had one other quick question.
Sure, good clarifying question. In alternative one, we wouldn't be widening beyond the existing edge of the pavement. So there would not be a need for a wall or any changes to that slope. So it would remain most as it is today, because again, it would just be a 5-foot sidewalk and would be pretty much dropping it into some of the width of the existing roadway. In this alternative, however, it's the 5-foot sidewalk plus the 5-foot bike lane. So as soon as we start to cut into that slope by 5 feet, we have to chase that back a little ways. And there are 2 ways to do it. One of the things we wanted to show is the most impactful, which would be where that new top of slope is here. If we were to just create a slope back, and of course there are standards that we have to meet with what that slope can be. And that's where the revised top of slope would be. Karen and I have discussed the fact, depending on what the feeling is of the group, and if that's something that we want to look at is minimizing that impact, we certainly could have a foot or 2 off the back of sidewalk and then have a short wall to then have the slope go back to try to meet a little closer to where it meets currently, to really reduce the impacts to that property. That can happen in either alternative 2, and we can talk about that a little bit more in alternative 3 as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
there is a solution possible with a wall or with the slope. And that's something, again, if this was the chosen alternative, our plan is to discuss with you a little bit more about follow-up questions like that, like which way should we be thinking of going with the engineering on it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And in front of the market where you're showing a new sidewalk that curves to meet the sidewalk area for the building itself, what is that, a curved sidewalk, and what happens to people who are crossing Railroad Street?
Yes, it would be a curbed crossing, and there would be handicapped ramps. There would be ADA ramps to get down to the street to cross.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other clarifying questions? All right, Karen.
Ready. Into alternative 3. So here we're seeing, again, that same segment of Bridge Street, an additional 5-foot sidewalk on the west side of the street in front of Richmond Market. But with this alternative on the east side, we're seeing a new shared use path. So for that section between Railroad Street and Depot Street, that shared use path is a 10-foot width. And then once we get up past Pleasant Street, sort of heading uphill here, that needs to be reduced down to an 8-foot shared use path to minimize the impacts, sort of keep everything within the right of way. and still sort of have sufficient width for those travel lanes and parking. So the idea here really being a shared use path on the east side that would have a mix of bikes and peds, particularly the slower moving uphill bikes. We'd maintain that shared lane use for the downhill cyclists if they feel comfortable sort of sharing the lane at that higher rate of speed. And you know, getting folks that are maybe not so bold could be using that shared use path sort of cautiously in both directions there. And then on the corner of Railroad Street, in addition to that 5-foot sidewalk, you're also seeing a proposal for a new mountable curb extension. So the idea here being to draw that curb out a little bit so that, you know, anyone in a passenger car is really gonna have to make that harder right-hand turn. But trucks will still be able to, you know, larger vehicles will still be able to navigate that intersection without wreaking too much havoc. And the idea there also sort of gives us the space and refuge for rounding out the pedestrian access at that intersection. So here we're showing an additional crosswalk across Bridge Street between sort of on the north leg of the intersection between Jelena Court and Railroad Street. So really rounding out that pedestrian access at that intersection.
Any clarifying questions on this alternative? Yes, Fran.
Yeah, can you, a shared use path, I'm just not exactly clear what that means. Is it like a sidewalk that both are using, or is it street level? Can you explain that a little bit further, just so I'm clear?
Sure. So the proposal here is for it to be raised, so there'd be a curb between the travelway and that facility. You know, there's options for what we would do for a surface treatment, but here we're envisioning it would be concrete, so it would sort of look and feel like an extra wide sidewalk, but potentially stripe it or do something to treat it in a way that it's clear that folks can both be, you know, riding and walking on it. So, you know, we sort of envision that this solution is the, you know, kids on bikes could probably feel pretty comfortable using this facility. But, you know, adults on bikes going downhill may still use that shared travel lane. So that's sort of the concept with this one.
Ian, did you have a hand raised? Oh, hold on, I can unmute you, I believe. There we go.
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that. You're inviting me. Sorry about that. Two comments. One is that I noticed that you're taking note of the right of way, and I think it's very important at this stage to use the right of way on the east side of the street, you know, and sort of liberate that for public use. And of course, the right of way on the west side is being taken up to a large extent by parking. So, you know, there's obviously opinions about that, whether that's a good use of right of way. The second comment relates to really what's already been raised, I think, about the Railroad Street, Bridge Street intersection. That's an uncomfortable place for pedestrians, making especially making the crossing onto that's on across Railroad Street, and so I think my sense is that the additional crosswalk will help to sort of calm the traffic that is either going straight or turning right and potentially getting into conflict with people on the crosswalk. So yeah, that the more that can be done to sort of calm that intersection, the better. So that this alternative 3 I think looks good from that perspective.
And it really helps to define that pedestrian space on all four corners. So it does, it's an additional crossing, but in all of the alternatives, really, we're showing just a further definition of what the pedestrian space is, which I think in any case will add to a little bit more safety and a little more awareness from the driver. Any questions?
Hi, this is Chris Granda. I was just wondering if there are any safety concerns about potentially bi-directional bike travel, sharing a sloped path with pedestrians. It just seems a little dicey to me.
Yeah, I certainly acknowledge your concern, and there is a speed differential there, as there is a speed differential between the uphill and the downhill cyclists. This alternative was really attempting to address a specific comment that we got in the local concerns meeting in a discussion that went on about how are kids supposed to move about through this space. And really, like, if a child is on a bike, they can't really ride. The sidewalk is too busy on the west side. So if this facility could accommodate thinking of an 8-year-old on a bike to provide them an alternative, that's really the intention here. The assumption, you certainly are, even as an adult, allowed to be in the shared use path, but there's some assumption that obviously a more serious cyclist is not going to make that choice to be riding on that shared use path, because their speed will be more appropriately matching, especially in the downhill direction, really matching with the speed of the traffic. So I think it would be rare that there would be the giant speed differential, again, except for in a small child. But your point is noted. I mean, there is certainly, that is certainly something to keep in mind, that in this alternative, perhaps that young cyclist is a little safer, but the pedestrians are dealing with an additional conflict in that case.
Thank you.
Yes. Bresser.
Hey, this is Gary. So, I mean, I like pieces of all of these. One thing I liked about, I think it was the second one, where there was a raised 5-foot sidewalk and then the 5-foot bike lane, is that it would keep people it would give like a 5-foot buffer between traffic and pedestrians. So that with having it all a walkway, I still worry about kids walking out towards the curb and being right next to cars. So that's why I like that. I like that mid where we have a crosswalk now by Sweet Simone's. I can see the need for another one. So I don't know. I go back and forth on that. But the other thought about, you mentioned you could do a wall. I was thinking if you, instead of just sloping that whole area by NOFA, I think if you did a wall that's like 3 feet high that people could kind of sit on and rest and talk to people, and then slope up, that could be a real attractive feature to add. Be like having benches along that sidewalk.
Great, thank you. Alan?
I was just wondering if there was a reason that in alternative 3, you kept the mid-block sidewalk and did not have the Pleasant Street new sidewalk. And then likewise, in alternative 2, you do not have the Railroad Street sidewalk on sort of the north side of that intersection. And are those sidewalks sort of mix and match, or are there specific reasons for laying out the numbers that you did?
There is a little bit of mix and match. One of the things I think that's most important to call your attention to is we would be unlikely to provide the new crosswalk as shown on your screen and the mid-block crossing both. In this case, that would replace the mid-block crossing. It would be a more typical, situation, and have at either end of the street have the crosswalk connecting to, now that there's a sidewalk the entire length, which again was something we heard in the local concerns meeting. But in the event there is an interest and support for, kind of changing and really looking at putting crosswalks everywhere, I mean, we certainly could look at an alternative that includes the new crosswalk at Railroad as well as the new crosswalk to the south of Pleasant. That certainly could all be looked at.
Okay, and if you went with the new crosswalk at Pleasant Street and
Mhm.
deleted the mid-block crosswalk, does that gain a parking place?
Well, so our initial analysis does show it gains a parking space. Karen has done some of the initial grading. One of the things that's obviously a factor there is to get folks across the street and give them a safe landing. We don't want someone in a wheelchair, for example, flying out into the street. So there's a little bit of manipulation if you think of the grades that are on that corner. So that is her preliminary assessment, but obviously depending on which alternative is preferred, we're going to fine tune that design and make sure we do actually gain a parking space. The good news is in any case, we wouldn't lose a parking space. It would be at least a net of 0. Our preliminary analysis says we might gain 1 space. Great. John, did you have something to add?
Yeah, first, thank you. It's really nice to be able to see this and not just have to dream it up in my head. So this helps me see, understand what's going on a lot better. I really like the idea of a little wider space on, I guess, the steep portion, just above the railroad to make it a little easier on bicyclists going uphill. So I think that's great. I certainly like the addition of crosswalks. I'm a little, I mean, it's good to hear that we might, if the mid-block crosswalk on the upper part of Bridge Street is removed, I'm glad to hear that we might be able to get a parking spot out of that. But I would say my feeling is that most of the crossing of Bridge Street in that block is done in the middle because that's where the parking lots are and where a number of the storefronts that get a lot of, in and out customers. So I don't know how many people will actually go to the end of the block to use that bump out and crosswalk versus just cross in the middle anyway.
Okay, that's a great point and something that we hadn't thought about. I think during our last meeting, there was more of a discussion about the folks that are coming out of Pleasant Street and walking up the side or going into the bank, that then there isn't a sidewalk to continue all the way to the north. And so that's why they're crossing kind of halfway up. But you raise a counterpoint to that might be, no, the destinations might be really between at that crosswalk and not necessarily just because the sidewalk ends. Thank you, John.
Oh, no problem. I mean, I still would love to see a crosswalk on the east side of Bridge Street there. Let's use that, a crosswalk, a sidewalk on the east side.
Yes. Well, that is shown in all of our alternatives. So either way, that is something that we would move forward with. Anyone else, either a clarifying question or feedback? Because as you've heard, we've gotten a little bit of feedback that seemed like people want to kind of do a little bit of mixing and matching. I mean, just us hearing kind of what those comments are helpful. We are going to ask for what the preferred alternative and what the preferred crosswalk location will be in a minute. But if you do have other comments, I like this about 2, but I prefer that about 3. Happy to get that feedback. All right. Well, Karen, did we have an image to show actually about that mountable corner next in our slideshow?
Yep.
Let's just show some of that so folks understand kind of what it is we're talking about here. In both of these images, you can see on the corner what is kind of a slightly mountable extension that, it would make the car provide a car with guidance to drive around it, but that a truck driver who's swinging a little wider would go over it. And again, we know on Railroad Street that they do get large trucks in and out. And so we wanted to make sure we're still accommodating those movements, but doing it in a way that in general slows the traffic down. So that's kind of, if you needed clarification for what you see now faintly to the left on Karen's screen, that mountable curb extension, that's what that is.
And Jen, you may have said it earlier when we were talking about, I think Alan was asking about mixing and matching and you were answering his question, but I was trying to take notes at the same time. So apologies here. but is the additional crosswalk that we've shown as part of alternative 3 at this intersection, is that only enabled with the tightened curb?
We could provide it in either case, but obviously it's a little better with the tightened curb because it does shorten that pedestrian crossing distance and provide some of that traffic calming that you get with a driver feeling like the curbs are closer. It makes a driver feel like they should drive a little bit slower. So we can certainly entertain it in either case. So, if someone has feedback on that, I'd be happy to hear that. Kathleen?
So my comment is that I think this sidewalk approach would be really positive because of the trucks that do come with deliveries. I think there could be some resistance to a full curb there. And I think it does provide a good way to protect better pedestrians and at the same time accommodate the types of vehicles that need to get onto Railroad Street. So I think that's a real positive.
Yeah, it does provide that additional definition. And in a passenger car, you're not going to think to yourself, oh yeah, I want to drive up there. It doesn't feel like you should. It tells you to drive around it, which again is a shorter radius, which is going to make you go a little slower around that corner, which is, the best for all users right there. Great. Anyone else? All right. So unless I'm mistaken, is it poll time, Karen?
It is first evaluation matrix.
Well, that's right. I'm too excited to find out how people are feeling. Please go ahead.
So just looking at a few of the impacts, the costs, the sort of purpose and need in a little more detail here in a side-by-side evaluation matrix. Cost-wise, we're sort of in the same ballpark for all 3 alternatives. And in terms of pedestrians, we're really sort of better accommodating and filling those gaps in the system that exists today with all 3 alternatives. Bike mobility and safety, that's where we get some differentiation between these alternatives. So obviously with those shared lane markings, we're not really dedicating space for the cyclists along the corridor. And because of that, we really felt like we couldn't say that it satisfies the purpose and need at this juncture, at least as we've laid them out here. Whereas with alternatives 2 and 3, accommodating those bikes in some way is really helping us towards that end goal of these improvements. So bike safety is a real differentiator. And then with right-of-way impact, again, with those slope impacts, we talked about some of the ways we might be able to mitigate what we're showing for that new top of slope and sort of the changes to the NOFA parcel there with alternatives 2 or 3, whereas alternative 1, we're really sort of maintaining approximately the edge of pavement that it exists today, and aren't having those more significant impacts, particularly on that parcel. I think those are the big highlights from this. Any questions or clarifications on this piece? Hearing none, we can jump to Jen's favorite part.
And my favorite part is finding out how does everybody feel? Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Just a question on the drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Just the more significant versus moderate.
Sure, and the biggest piece there, so there are some drainage structures on the east side of the corridor. With the bike lane, we could actually we may need to do some relocation of those structures. But the impact would definitely be less because those curb lines are actually further out than the other two options. Those curb lines are pretty squeezed in to sort of where the existing edge of pavement is today. And so we do see sort of a more significant lift for relocating those drainage structures, particularly on that east side, where we're bringing that curb line in pretty far into where the edge of pavement is today.
Gotcha.
Kathleen?
I did have a question about cost. Does would the cost change for the alternatives 2 or 3 if rather than have just a slope, you would also have a short retaining wall? Or is that included in the cost, or is it just the slope that's included in the cost?
So with this conceptual cost, we have included that earthwork to do that slope work. So, you know, sort of thinking through the most impactful of options at that location. But certainly acknowledging your point, I think it probably would be a bit more expensive to use a retaining wall there, and particularly, you know, what materials we're going to use for that retaining wall would be a factor. That's definitely something to consider in that discussion of what the right answer is if we're going with an option 2 or 3 here, how we want to mitigate that impact if that's something that we're interested in doing, and what the cost implications might be.
Thank you.
Ian?
Yeah, comparing 2 and 3, but focusing on the idea of a shared use path that's been mentioned. But personally, I just don't like the idea of assuming we're going to be encouraging more people to walk and more people to ride a bicycle. That's not enough space for people walking in both directions, and we don't know how many people would choose to use the path for riding a bicycle. But my experience is, well, for instance, on the Burlington bike path, it gets busy, and sharing between people running, people walking, and people riding bicycles it doesn't work very well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sai?
A quick question, Jen. Does this cost estimate include design and construction inspection costs, or is it only for construction?
Karen, did you include those soft costs with it?
Yes, so this is, you know, contingencies and design and engineering included, but no right of way. So if there are right of way impacts on the alternative, we're not including an estimate for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? And if not, I get to launch my poll. So what we'd like to know is, in this block, based on your current understanding of the alternatives presented, which alternative do you prefer? And this is just to understand how the group is leaning. And then we can talk a little bit about, for the folks that don't agree, if there's something that made them not like it as much that we could add. Now, again, we'll talk about crosswalks in a minute. So this is more what you like for the treatment along the corridor. So alternative 1 is putting sidewalks in what is the existing pavement width. It is not widening out any further. Alternative 2 is providing a sidewalk in an uphill bike lane. Alternative 3 is the sidewalks and a shared use path on the east side of Bridge Street. And 4 is, I don't want any change. So I would love it if everyone could indicate their preference, even if it isn't a strong preference. but just so that we have an understanding of what folks are thinking about. And as I said, I'd love to hear afterwards if you felt strongly about something, or there's something from a different alternative than you voted for you'd like to see included, or anything else that we should be thinking about. Happy to hear it. I think there's still a couple of people who didn't vote. Has everyone voted? Give you one more second.
I didn't vote. I figured I wasn't allowed to.
Thank you for refraining, because if you're like me, you really want to.
I'm refraining as well.
I can't vote myself either, so.
I didn't vote either.
All right, great. Well, then I'm going to end the polling. The good news is the results are unanimous. We have everyone who voted prefers alternative 2. Now we're going to get to the question of crosswalks in 1 second. Is there anything else outside of what is shown on alternative 2 that you wanted us to be thinking about, or that you didn't like about alternative 2? If we were, when we're going to be preparing a preliminary design, is there anything that we should be have in the back of our minds? Good thinking, Karen. Here, I'll stop the sheet results. Is
So
there
you're
any?
asking if there were elements of the other alternatives that they would want to incorporate into alternative 2?
Exactly. So for example, at Railroad Street, is the addition of that, that added feature to kind of better define the edge of the roadway for those right turning vehicles and kind of protect the pedestrians and get them a little shorter of a crossing distance? Is that something that's interesting? Kathleen, please.
That is exactly what I was going to suggest, that feature be added
Okay.
to alternative 2.
I like that also. This is
Okay.
Chris.
Okay. And do we want to add that crosswalk down there as well? So that there would be crosswalks on all 4 legs of that intersection? So another crossing on Bridge Street, taking advantage of that shorter distance?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Great.
Hey, this is Fran. Sometimes I worry like that if there are 2 crosswalks on the main road there,
Mm-hmm.
the impact on drivers, like seeing that there are people waiting, even with maybe with a light flashing, it would be different, but just the ability of drivers to see everything, that there are 2 crosswalks there that people could be crossing on either one. That's all. Just
keep that in mind. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
keep that visibility in mind and maybe evaluate whether there needs to be signage or what we should be thinking about for that.
Yeah, because we don't want to lull pedestrians into thinking it's fine to cross there, and turns out that, if you're headed down to the store, like understanding there's a crosswalk there, or people coming out of the store and heading up the street. I'm terrible with directions, but so they have to, they might get partway into the intersection and have to stop for a pedestrian. So I just want to be aware of that, because that can be confusing.
Sure. Thank you. Does anyone feel strongly about providing a 4th crossing at Bridge and Pleasant, or do we think putting this bump out in this crossing here kind of addresses the need of folks to cross at that location? I don't hear any strong reaction, so I think we feel good about providing a nice short crossing distance here in just that one crossing location at this intersection on Bridge.
So I think that's probably fine. I just want to note that the creamy window will be at the Northern Spruce. So people coming to get creamies will have to walk down. And I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm just noting that will, in the summertime, certainly be an attraction for people who are in the village. But maybe having a sidewalk on the other side, it's a moot point. So.
Okay. Well, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about crosswalks now too. So we're going to do a poll regarding the crosswalks. All right, so if you could only choose one, which new pedestrian crossing would you prefer to see implemented? So there's the south leg at Pleasanton Depot. There's the north leg with the bump out, which would replace that mid-block crossing. And then there's the north leg of Railroad in Jolena.
Could we, I'm not sure I get the difference between 3 and 1.
Well, 3 and 1 are at a different intersection. So 3 is down at Railroad. It's the one shown on your screen now.
Okay. Mhm.
And then 1 is the location up at there, just south
Oh,
of
yeah,
Depot.
yeah. Sorry, got it. That makes sense.
No, that's it. That's okay. We've been off that screen for a little bit, so it's a good reminder. So we'll take a few minutes. Again, the first one is shown on your screen currently. The second one is at that same intersection, but with the bump out. Karen, you're doing great. As I'm speaking, she's switching it to the different crosswalks. And number 3 is down at Railroad in Jolena. Thanks. All right. Anyone else want to vote? Well, we still have a second left. Well, this poll is not as even. This one is a little more split. So I think there's a desire to have a lot of different crosswalks. So this is good feedback for us to have. And I think we kind of got this feedback in the comments. You folks showed that you do want to add a crosswalk down at Railroad and Jolena along with that kind of mountable curb we're talking about. And then there was a lot of interest in crossings up at Pleasanton Depot. So I think although there isn't one preferred over the others, I think the message to us is very clear that accommodating the pedestrians being able to cross the street is important. And we'll take that into account as we move forward with our preferred alternative, which is alternative 2. So thank you for that. Is there any other input or discussion on this section of the corridor? And if not, then I would say, Karen, did you want to start talking about our other location?
Sure. Hopefully the flyovers of my house are done so that I can actually keep myself on unmute here. So moving across the river over to the intersection of Bridge Street, Huntington Road, and Thompson Road and Cochrane Road, we took a look at the intersection and really came up with, again, 3 alternatives that give some consideration to the operations and sort of what's happening out there in the current condition. In all 3 alternatives, we're going to see crosswalks on all 4 legs of the intersection. So really trying to round out that pedestrian access. So in alternative 1 here, you're seeing those crossings with an all-way stop condition. So all approaching vehicular traffic is, seeing a stop sign as they approach the intersection. So pretty different than what's out there today with the sort of through movement between Bridge Street and Huntington Road, but stopping all traffic so that folks can be making that crossing with those vehicles stopped at a stop bar. The other things that we're seeing here are just providing a landing place for those pedestrians on those crossings. And again, here we're looking at doing an updated curb line to just try to make that sort of smooth right-hand turn between Bridge Street and Huntington Road, bringing in that radius just a bit to sort of discourage folks from rolling through that stop sign and getting folks to stop for that peg crossing.
Any questions on this?
All right, hearing none, we will jump to the second alternative for the intersection. And with this one, again, you're seeing sort of the same geometry as the previous option. All 4 legs of the intersection with those pedestrian crossings. But with this option, we're sort of re-envisioning the 2-way stop control. And instead of having the stop condition for Thompson Road and Cochrane Road, as in the current condition, we're having the stop condition for Bridge Street and Thompson Road. So it's really making that through movement that's uncontrolled between Huntington Road and Cochrane Road. And one of the big advantages, I think, to this option is just it sort of cleans up some of the confusion for folks that are approaching, particularly from the Bridge Street approach, maybe making that left-hand turn onto Cochrane Road, gives them some definition on where they should be as they're sort of approaching the intersection and waiting their turn and letting the folks on Huntington Road go ahead, or the folks on Cochrane Road in this case. But again, updated curb lines, trying to draw in that radius, slow folks down, try to prevent folks from creeping through that stop sign.
Any questions on that? So in both of these alternatives, again, really modifying that curb line because it was designed for people to move quickly from Bridge Street to Huntington Road and vice versa. And in both these alternatives, it's really trying to slow that movement down and better define the intersection. All right, seeing none.
And then alternative 3, which really reinvents the intersection of Bridge Street with Huntington Road. So here we're looking at a mini roundabout. And so inscribed diameter of 90 feet with a mini roundabout. Sort of one of the distinguishing features is that the center island is a fully mountable island. So even though it sort of has a smaller footprint than a typical modern roundabout, we can still accommodate those heavy vehicles that move through here. And according to the traffic counts, there are some heavy vehicles that do navigate this intersection. So we wanted to make sure that we were accommodating those vehicles. Again, you're seeing sort of some mountable curb to make sure that they're getting through there and not dragging their tires over new grass planted or anything like that. I apologize, I do have some background noise, so I will speak through it, but if it gets too loud, I'll jump on you.
It's not too bad, Karen.
That's good. That's good. It's very loud here. Accommodating those large vehicles, but by design, a roundabout's going to slow the vehicular traffic, bringing folks sort of into these channelized lanes using these splitter islands. The nice thing about this design, we are still able to accommodate those big vehicles, but have these splitter islands be a hard curb with a nice ped refuge in between. So one of the advantages to this design is really having the pedestrian be able to cross one lane of traffic at a time, have a refuge, and then continue and cross the other lane of traffic. So it sort of splits up their crossing effectively at each of these legs where there's a splitter island. On the Thompson Road, we're envisioning just a painted splitter here. And then I think that's all I wanted to mention. I was thinking there was one more feature, but the only other thing to note here is that there are some more significant impacts to the right-of-way, just to sort of gain the extra space needed to accommodate that circulatory width there, and still accommodate sidewalks for those to meet those crossings on each corner, but not really a huge impact in terms of right-of-way acquisition.
Any questions on this? Kathleen?
Thank you. So is a 90-foot roundabout really, is it large enough to accommodate this successfully in your experience?
Karen, do you want to answer that? Go ahead.
So a mini roundabout really, there are few trucks that navigate this intersection. We certainly wouldn't want to have a smaller full-size roundabout with that center island, with the expectation that we're not accommodating those big vehicles, but we have done all the turning movement templates with the vehicles that we anticipate going through here, and those swept paths do work with this layout. So we're pretty confident that we can accommodate those vehicles with something like this. And what really enables that is that mountable center island. So those big vehicles are going over that center island to make the movement. But the person in a typical passenger car is not going to feel comfortable doing that, and they're really going to use the circulatory roadway to make their movements.
Karen, do you want to show that example? Right, isn't our next image a picture of the ones in Middlebury?
Oh, sure.
Ian, I think you raised your hand next.
Yeah, I was looking at option number 1, and it's a question about visibility. The stop, if one's traveling east on Huntington Road, the stop line seems to be, right there is set way back. I'm not sure that from that position it'd really be possible to know whether it's your turn to move or whether it's safe to move.
A very valid concern. One of the reasons the stop bar does need to be back on that leg is because of the trucks that are turning from Bridge Street. And we might be able to do a little fine tuning, again, thinking about maybe a mountable curb, kind of like we're talking about Railroad Street, or we could certainly give some thought to that, whether that stop line could be moved up further if we treated the corner a little differently. But because in this situation, we were very careful, this is an always stop situation. So they shouldn't need to look too far. They should be able to see if someone is sitting at that stop line or not. And if the other car isn't already at that stop line, at an always stop, the person who arrives first has the right of way. So we did not propose a stop sign on this leg in a condition where there wasn't also a stop sign on Bridge Street, just so that to ensure that safety. All right.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And was it Gary? Because I know what it says isn't actually your name, right?
Right, it's my last name, right. So I'm a big fan of rotaries or roundabouts. So, the one that really doesn't work is in Williston, by the Staples Best Buy area. People just blow through because it's so small. And I guess I'd like some reassurance that we're not creating something like that.
Sure. And so I think one of the issues with the one in Williston is that it's really not designed to have a good deflection, which means basically, the vehicles that are entering aren't forced to sort of have to turn and turn again to make that through movement, right? So it's really, in this design, at least the way we've laid it out, making sure that those vehicles really have to, turn and turn again to make the through movement that gets initially sort of slows folks down because they're channelized by the curb on both sides, but then also having to sort of make that movement is a little more challenging than just being able to, drive right through. And with that mountable feature, just making sure that that's well designed so that folks are really discouraged from mounting that unless they are in a big truck.
Right. The idea is to make it very uncomfortable for a car to drive over it.
Exactly.
So the picture you showed in Middlebury, that's the one by their Newtown offices?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think that works really well. And is that a 90-foot?
Yeah, Manchester. I'm sorry. Yes, it is Manchester. You're right. You said Middlebury. Yes.
Oh, well, how about the one in Middlebury? Is that
Or is that
significant?
one? No, this one was Middlebury. Yeah, and it is by the town office in Middlebury. That is correct, right? Isn't it?
This one is in Manchester.
Oh, okay.
This is a mini. So the one in Middlebury, I don't know of a second one in Middlebury. I think the one in Middlebury that you're likely thinking of is
By the new bridge.
Yeah.
is a full size roundabout. So that's 120 or 130 foot diameter.
Yeah, okay.
It does have a center feature, but it is the center island on that one is mountable. The mountable width is really, really wide to accommodate those big vehicles on that one. Just by way of how those legs come into that particular intersection. Whereas with a mini, you really don't have that center feature. So that Middlebury one does have a center feature. I think it has a light and some plantings and stuff in the middle.
So the one in Manchester, there is a slight curb that the big trucks would have to go over or not?
Yeah, so a large vehicle navigating this one in Manchester, you know, they would approach the intersection, but then they would, even to make this right, they would really, you know, oversteer and be over this mountable center island. And to make that left, they're going right over that center island. The nice feature about the one that we've laid out compared to the one that you're seeing on the screen here is that we're proposing, you know, hard curb and a ped refuge here, not just a mountable splitter island. So this would be a more substantial feature in the one that we're proposing for the Bridge Street Huntington Road intersection.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's an important feature, Karen. So all of those splitter islands, I think it was on 3 legs of the one that we're looking at, would have like a full 6-inch curb.
Exactly. And 6 feet of refuge between each crossing to make sure you can get those, you know, ped pads in there
Right.
with the appropriate spacing.
So even as you're approaching it, it feels narrower because you have hard curb on either side, and they're in you know, a full island, you know, there in the center.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to mount that even in a truck, probably.
Alan, did you want to add some comment or question?
With a 90-foot mini roundabout, what is the anticipated automobile speed going through it? Is this 5 mile an hour, 10 mile an hour, 15 mile an hour? How fast will they be able to go around that?
That is a really good question. It would be really uncomfortable to operate at the speed limit, obviously, but we haven't analyzed that for, you know, exactly what the sort of design speed would be. But that's certainly something we could be looking into to gauge a little bit better.
Okay, the reason for my question is for pedestrians. So I've both driven and walked the Middlebury roundabout, and for whatever reason, things get slowed down there enough that as a pedestrian, it's not too bad. We moved here from near Olean, New York, where they put in roundabouts that were a little bit bigger, and the intent was to be able to go through the roundabout at 15 miles an hour. And at 15 miles an hour, with the best will in the world as a driver of a car, watching the cars coming in and out takes your total attention, and you wind up not being able to watch for pedestrians. And they put the pedestrian crossings mid-block with flashing lights. They got them away from roundabouts, so it worked, except in one place. And I tried to cross once at one of the roundabouts, and boy, it was not safe. So that's my reason for the question. And that's why if it slows people down enough that the pedestrian thing would work, I think this would be great. Otherwise, I'm for the 4-way stops.
Understood.
John.
I'm just curious, this mountable section or portion of the roundabout, is that difficult for plow trucks to clear snow from?
That's a good question. In terms of winter maintenance, I think the plows would be focused on that, on the roadway and not necessarily on the center island. You know, trucks are still going to mount that sort of regardless, but you know, with a significant snowfall, they may need to do some clearing on that. That is a good point, but for your typical, you know, 2 or 3 inch snow event, they're going to focus on that roadway, and probably not even bother clearing snow on the center island. But again, you know, we get a big dumping of you know, feet of snow. They're probably going to do a pass on that, just to make sure that trucks can still get through there.
Fran?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been to Manchester a bunch of times. I've done a bunch of work down there. So I've driven that roundabout quite a bit. And you can't go really fast through it. It's just good. You have to slow down when you get in there because it's a pretty tight turn. And it is kind of nice to have the pedestrian things set back from it because you can get across pretty easily. Anyhow, okay, that's it.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Karen, would you like to go over the evaluation?
Sure. Let's forge ahead here. Sorry, I was just jotting down a few notes. All right, so big differentiators on the intersection alternatives when we sort of compare them side by side here. Obviously, the cost of that mini roundabout is you know, an order of magnitude higher than the all-way or two-way stop options. We are you know, considering that we probably would need to do some full depth reconstruction to make sure that that roadway is going to hold up and last, and we're not putting in a roundabout on top of you know, roadway that isn't going to be able to take those bigger trucks making those sweeping turns through there. So that is sort of considered in the cost that you're seeing, as well as contingencies and engineering and design and all that. Not right of way though, so we are not considering right of way in the cost. In terms of pedestrians, you know, we're really better accommodating pedestrians, providing all 4 legs with a crossing. The one sort of advantage with alternative 3 is that we are creating that median refuge so that pedestrians can sort of cross one lane of traffic, have a safe place to wait, and then cross another lane of traffic. But otherwise, really comparable across all 3 alternatives in terms of rounding out that pedestrian access. With bikes, you know, yet to be determined in terms of, you know, with whatever alternative we're going to go with. We certainly can think through what the appropriate connection is for the cyclists. It may be a shared lane condition. Do we want to consider, if we're really leaning towards like an alternative 2, do we want to consider adding in a bike lane? We probably could do that without being right up against the right of way. We still had some wiggle room in there. So something to consider as we're sort of thinking through which alternative works. So sort of with bikes strays out a little bit, sort of depending on which way we land. But otherwise, really quite comparable, you know, slightly more impacts with the roundabout, just, you know, making sure that it's a good design, it's properly drained, you know, all of those pieces would make it, you know, more of a moderate impact in terms of utilities, drainage, et cetera. But certainly all 3 are meeting our purpose and need for this project.
Any questions on that? Ian, please.
Yeah, my use of this intersection is mostly on a bicycle coming from Johnny Brook Trail and so on Huntington Road, and then making a left onto Bridge Street. So I'm looking at the three options for that. And the four-way stop, because of that huge setback, I'm a little nervous thinking that if it's my turn, it's going to take me a long time to get from the, I mean, I have been known to do a rolling stop, but if the conditions are such that you have to do a full stop, it's going to take a little while, and I wonder whether that's going to sort of try the patience of the other people stopping at this thing. For number two, I think a lot of people find two-way stops a bit confusing, so I would have a concern of safety there, that you know, people coming through that intersection may not be, if they're not familiar with it, may not be quite clear about whether it's a four-way stop or a two-way, sort of which leaves the roundabout. That seems to fit everybody's desires, pretty much everybody, except the cost obviously looks a bit scary.
Anybody else? Any feelings? Any questions? Gary?
A couple things. I've worked on the corner of Thompson and Cochrane Road on a house there for a couple of years. And so I've watched the traffic a lot. And it seems like people coming from Cochrane Road to that stop sign, if they stop at all completely, they stop well beyond the stop sign. I think because it's such a big sweeping corner. And I don't know, maybe because it's not a 90-degree bend, you have to maintain the curve that's there, but it seems like it'd be helpful to tighten up the curve.
Do you want to, Karen, do you want to show that an image of the intersection again?
Yeah, right. Is that because it's, you know, you're not doing 90-degree bend there, that you have to have that so wide?
Well, it is a little tighter than what is shown in existing, right, Karen? Really, it looks like that sidewalk is being provided in what is currently roadway.
Yeah, so the intent there was to draw that in a bit. You know, one of the things we struggled with was still accommodating some of those larger vehicles, but we were able to draw that in a bit, and basically the back of sidewalk is pretty close to the existing edge of pavement.
So it will tighten it up. The concept does tighten it up a bit, Gary.
Yeah. I think for me, the cost difference makes me lead not to do the rotary. That and knowing how some of my friends who drive excavating, you know, dump trucks hauling excavators and trailers through there constantly, I don't think they're going to like the rotary, even though they can get through it. So for me, I think I'm back liking the four-way stop the best.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
To Ian's point about the setback of the stop line on Huntington Road with the four-way stop, to me, the answer to that is to put a green box for the bicycles out in front. Because bicycles certainly don't need to start way back to make the turn like a long truck does. So put us out in front in a green box.
Yeah, Alan, I mean, we will certainly look at that. The trouble will be with the sweep of the truck. We don't want to tell you to sit somewhere that if a tractor trailer is taking that right turn, that they're going to clip you. So we'd have to be very careful with how we design that. But that is a great idea, and we could take a look at that. And like I said, I think there might be a solution where we really look at whether what is shown, say, on Karen's screen right now as an updated curb line, maybe it's similar to what we showed at Railroad. Maybe it's a curb line that's a little bit more mountable so that the truck doesn't maybe need to go as far down Huntington as it swings. And maybe that stop bar could be pulled a little closer.
And I will maybe add on to this. My initial thought when Ian was speaking about that issue was maybe doing a 2-stage left for those cyclists.
Mhm.
So we could put the green box out of the swept path of those heavy vehicles to be able to then, make the crossing, essentially a 2-stage left, you make the crossing here, have a little refuge and make the crossing here. So when you have the right of way, you're able to make that in sort of 2 stages instead of a single sort of sweeping left turn, which would it would get you out of that path of, any heavy vehicles trying to navigate the intersection potentially.
But yeah, we understand how that is a concern, certainly. Anyone else?
Yeah, hey, John here.
Hi,
I'll
John.
jump in. Again, I haven't done an official count, but my feeling is there's at least 50 cars, maybe 100 that go through that intersection for every pedestrian, and and maybe 40 to 50 for every bicycle. And I think the idea of a 4-way stop would not be, would cause some riots, and particularly at busy times of day. And it would actually, it would be worse for the environment, I'd say, just because the number of vehicles would have to slow down then speed up again. And having to doing that specifically so that it'll be okay for a few people to walk across there. And no fence, Fran, I know you do it several times a day. I'd rather have a special way to get you back and forth across than adjust it for all vehicles crossing there. But that's, maybe that's just me not going to adapt to something new, but it seems too much. And I guess the 2-way, changing the configuration of the 2-way stop, again, so much of the traffic and the flow is, Huntington to Bridge Street to Huntington, that seems to me the most efficient lanes to allow to move freely.
Yeah, but our challenge becomes, John, and it is fine if the town decides that the no change option is the option. I mean, that's why we did the study, so that we could talk about these things. But the issue with that is then you're not going to have any speed reduction. If we get into a situation where we're trying to tighten up the curbs here and have people go a little slower, the through movement from Huntington to Bridge Street becomes less of a through movement the more we tighten it up. It's less obvious. Yes, you'll know it if you're from here, but it's really, once it's tight like this, it's more set up like a standard intersection. It feels like a standard intersection. So me driving it from out of town, I'm going to stop as I come up on Bridge Street because that feels like I should stop. I'm entering like a through street that I'm about to turn on to. So it's one of those things to really get the gains in the slowing of the traffic and tightening up the intersection a little bit. It then lends itself to kind of a different setup for control.
Yeah, no, I hear that, and it does make some sense. I'm just a little, I don't know.
Yep. And the advantage,
particularly the morning, like the morning rush, which for Richmond is 15 to 20 minutes long, but it's a whole lot of traffic, vehicles moving through there. I don't know. I'm willing to keep my mind open and
the good news, though, in a two-way stop situation, when it's Bridge Street is stopping, is that then, as you said, most of the traffic is taking a right-hand turn. And as we know, how long you have to hesitate to take a right-hand turn tends to be a lot less. The delay and the impact is a lot less than if it was someone taking a left turn from a stop. So there was some thought made as to which two approaches should stop, which should be able to yield. But no, your point is taken. Like I said, I in no way, we get no commission by, going with a recommendation that builds something you don't want. So your opinion is noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Gary?
Yeah, so, I thought the main purpose for me in the always stop wasn't pedestrians. I don't think I think the danger at this intersection now is people coming through that don't know the intersection, don't know who has the right of way. And that's the near misses you see on a daily basis of people blowing through in one direction or another. So I think it would make it safer for pedestrians, but I think the real gain is in the vehicles, having everybody stop.
Thank you for that. Anyone else want to weigh in? Or is it time to take a poll and see how we're feeling? Alan?
I just have to say, in the urban cycling websites, they have this picture that, even Amsterdam wasn't Amsterdam. They have a picture of 1970s Amsterdam in total gridlock with automobiles, and the same street now is about 3/4 pedestrians and bicyclists. You're not going to have pedestrians and bicyclists when you have streets that have been designed to be unsafe for the pedestrians and bicyclists. And if everybody has to have 2 tons of metal to haul themselves around, we as a civilization are going to be in a real bad spot. We already are, but it's just going to be hopeless. People got to be able to get around without 2 tons of metal to haul them.
Great, thank you. So how are we feeling? Are we ready for a poll? Because we've heard a number of very differing views. So I am very curious to see kind of where we would land. All right, so for this final location, given your understanding of these alternatives, which would you prefer? Alternative 1 being the always stop, alternative 2 being the two-way stop where Bridge and Thompson stop, alternative 3, which is the mini roundabout, or alternative 4, which is no change. All right, just give you a couple more seconds. All right. And we do have a bit of a majority, but a little bit of folks being a little torn. We have 67%, so they liked the always stop condition, and then 33% liked the mini roundabout. So I guess one of the things that I'm curious about, is there anyone who voted for one alternative or the other that feels, oh, but only if I would have voted for 1 if this, or I could have voted for 3 if only, anything we should be thinking about that would make the alternative you didn't pick more palatable for you?
Can you make the roundabout less expensive?
That's a tough thing to do.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood, and that's fair.
Well, Uncle Joe will take care of that part.
No? Okay, so everybody, feels the way they feel, and that's great. Like I said, at least we do have a majority here. One of the things that we will talk about with the project team is moving forward, some of the little details, how if we're going to go with an always stop condition, how can we move, since we got that feedback about that stop bar that's back and how a cyclist is going to be able to go through that. We'll talk about some of those details about whether we can move that forward, either with a mountable curb or provide a bike box, or better ways to kind of address some of those concerns that were raised here. Kathleen?
I just wanted to add that I really like the roundabout idea, but there's such public resistance to it
Mhm.
that I'm not sure that it could be feasible. I think the price tag is obviously higher, but I think if it were the best alternative from multiple perspectives,
Mhm.
that we could probably get some funding to help with it. So it's really, there's such public resistance to roundabouts, but I think it looks like this could be a really good application for one. Barring that, alternative one made sense to me.
Right.
I would just offer, with regard to roundabouts in general, that's typically the case, that there's a lot of opposition at first. And a lot of that usually kind of comes down to fear of the unknown and uncertainty about it because it's so new to the area. And you can, if you look into it, you can see across the country in most areas where they've been installed, people do come around. The public opinion polls that have been done usually exhibit somewhat of a flip-flop in terms of people who were opposed before it went in and then afterwards do approve of it. But you're correct to point out that it is no doubt an uphill battle to get one installed to begin with. And I think Manchester, I think I know specifically it was a challenge for them to come around and get there. I think they have 2 roundabouts. We saw the mini tonight, but there's a full-size one right down the road from it. Those were a challenge to get those installed to begin with, and at a pretty hefty price tag.
Yeah, I really like the idea of making this more of a four-way intersection, because it really does not work right now. So,
Mhm.
you know, the 2 alternatives that do that are really a positive direction.
Well, and that is something that we hope that even if in the end your alternative wasn't selected, that at least you can see this as a step in the right direction to try to, whether it's you're looking at slow vehicles down to improve safety, or whether it's to increase the mobility in the people on bikes or walking. Hopefully you can at least see an advantage over the existing condition. All right, any other comment on this? Excellent. Well, in that case, I guess we will just talk about kind of our wrap up and next steps. And if you want to get in touch, as Jason said, there is the project website on the CCRPC's website. There, you can provide additional comment if you would like. Jason said usually after the meeting, you know, we'll accept comment for about 2 weeks, and at which time we'll probably get together with Jason and Ravi, and we'll talk about, you know, what we heard tonight, what other things we'll be looking into, and then look forward to advancing some, you know, preliminary plans for you that will be a tool that the town can use to pursue other funding and to, you know, further understand more exact costs and move the projects forward. Thanks so much for spending your evening with us. And it's just a couple minutes after 8:30, so I think we estimated the time well too. So enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. This was
Yeah.
great.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, good night, guys.